Welcome to Behind the Scenes. I'm your host, Hector Montalvo. This show is dedicated to asking tough questions for you, the viewers. We bring you their responses, and we let you decide. Joining us here today at our MCTV studios, we have Mr. David Babb. Mr. David Babb, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hector.
Mr. Babb, today's topic, we're discussing the Department of Revenue and what their role is. I understand that you're involved with DOR in the court system. Can you give us a little bit about that? Explain a little bit about it?
I've been involved in custody and child care for about 5 years in the probate court, which all concluded in March, where I got custody of my son and shared custody of my daughter. And it's still a battle. I don't understand the process and how DOR functions between the two parents. It seems that the women are dealt with a totally different way than the men. And those were big issues in the years I was dealing with DOR, and still are now. As I said, I went through a custody trial that ended in March, and now with DOR, I was in last week speaking to DOR because they've been taking money from my jobs. My car gets something wrong with it, they intercept that money. And these are issues that I really don't understand, because if I have agreements with DOR to pay money, why are you messing with my jobs? Why are you taking more money from me? And these are questions I've asked to many of the DOR attorneys there. And, you know, it just goes unanswered. We do what we want.
Now, you mentioned you had shared custody?
Correct.
Okay, so then basically you have one child, or?
I have shared custody of my daughter. I have her 4 days a week, and her mom has her 3 days a week.
So you have them half of the time?
Half of the time,
okay.
Correct.
And how many kids do you have?
2.
You have 2, so your son and your daughter. Correct. And how has been the experience in regards to child support and how you've been treated?
Well, since I got custody of my son in March and shared of my daughter, I don't get child support. I went in and filled out all the stuff for it, but I haven't heard from DOR as of yet.
You filed your modification?
I filed everything and have not heard back from them at all.
Now, we followed your case when we first heard about your case, and your judge is Amy Blake. She
Correct.
practices out of the Salem Probate Court. Correct. We found Amy Blake to be an honorable judge, where we found her to actually follow the law. And by that I mean she has a book that she keeps on her desk, and she goes line by line. How has she been as a judge in your case?
In the beginning of my case, I spoke to different attorneys and different people who all told me I should try to get a different judge. But I go by my feelings, my instincts, and I think she's probably the best judge in Salem Probate Court. And that's because I feel that whether a decision goes in my favor or not, she's fair, right down the middle, and goes by the law. And so I really have no complaints with her at all. And
unlike the other Essex County judges that I'm familiar with, what this show is familiar with, Judge Amy Blake seems to be more open and transparent as far as her courtroom is concerned and so on. Now, have you used DOR in the presence of Judge Blake?
Actually, yes, I have, and I try to. Just recently, as I said, I was in there last week because I work 3 jobs. I don't have a child support order now, but I have an order to pay arrears. So the 3rd job, DOR has been taking my whole complete salary for my 3rd job.
So you have an agreement or stipulation or an order from the court.
Correct.
And basically what's happening is your agreement is not being lived up to by the Department of Revenue because they're seizing 2 other checks?
Well,
is that right?
What it is I'm ordered to pay $100 a week, and that's what I pay. It comes directly out of my full-time job. My 3rd job, I work for the state. I get paid by DCF to work with men with these same issues in the court. I go to court with guys, show them how to fill out motions, modifications, stuff like that. I started doing that last January. In June, DOR took my paycheck and took 4 more after that, totaling over $1,000. And when I went and asked about it, I was told at the Salem office because they could. So I filed stuff in court. To this date, I still don't have a resolution to it. I was in front of Blake last week on it, and I'm waiting for her decision on it.
Now, child support, basically, when you go into court and you're facing, who's the parties in the case? Is it you bringing your ex-wife, or your ex-wife bringing you in, or who's bringing you in?
Correct. I'm bringing in my ex-wife now for child support because I have legal and full custody of my son. So I'm looking for child support for him.
Now, are you represented by the Department of Revenue as you're looking for?
Well, and that's part of my aggravation. I went in last week about my paychecks. My ex-wife was there, and it seemed like I was non-existent. Here I am bringing a motion in front of the judge. They're talking to her. They spent most of the time talking to her. The DOR attorney really never spoke to me about it. You know, and these are the issues that, in my opinion, most men have. All right? I'm the opposite. I'm a male who has custody looking for child support. No attention is being paid to me. If it was reversed, I mean, just as I dealt with a year ago with attorney Donatelli, you know, she came up to me, she didn't even, hi, my name is, it was you, come here. I don't take that from anybody. Why do I need to be treated like that? My name is X, you ask me my name, you introduce yourself. This is why there's big problems in the probate court when it comes to males with DOR. And I've seen this. I go to the probate court every Thursday. I've seen these things happen, you know, and you try to speak to them and you can't speak to them. You know, it's like you're automatically a male and you're wrong. Well, there are some guys that do what they're supposed to do. And we want the same treatment as you give the lady that's asking for child support.
Well, it's interesting because we followed a lot of cases after hearing your case back in January, and I can tell you that this is not just affecting fathers in general and men in general. It's affecting mothers as well, but most importantly, it's affecting the children.
Correct.
Because the children have the right to have access to both parents, okay? So that's a different topic for a different day. Right. But I want to bring in my other two guests. Right now I'd like to introduce to the audience, I'd like to introduce attorney Joanna Rodriguez, and also coming back by popular demand is attorney Anthony Diffusia. And we welcome you guys to the show.
Thank you, Hector.
You know, my question to you guys is, we've heard David Babb's story a little bit about the unfair treatment that he would get in the court system. And basically, we've asked the question of the Department of Revenue. Who is the Department of Revenue? Why don't you tell us a little bit about who is the Department of Revenue, if you could?
Well, I believe the Department of Revenue is just basically an agency that from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that basically uses their employees to try and collect child support on behalf of mothers, on behalf of fathers, on behalf of the custodial parent. The Department of Revenue does that by, number one, having offices over in the probate and family courts. One's located in Lawrence. There's another one that's located in Salem. I believe their headquarters is over in Salem for Essex County as well, on Congress Street. And what they do is just basically help collect either child support in arrears, establish child support orders, and particularly if you don't have health insurance, if you have mass health, they ensure that that person is collecting child support if the parties are not together. So in a big spectrum, I think the Department of Revenue is helpful in a way because, number one, they're collecting checks directly from the non-custodial parent out of their paychecks every single week, and you don't have a mother or a father chasing after the other parent every single week. So I think that's beneficial for some people. And in addition to that, they're also ensuring that the children have health insurance, which is important. So I think in the global idea of Department of Revenue is beneficial, but I think there are some disadvantages to also having DOR as well.
So, Attorney Diffusia, let me just ask you, is the Department of Revenue, what branch of government do they come from?
The executive branch.
So they are executive branch.
Well, yeah, it is, but I think you got to go one step further because you got to look at this like an insurance problem. I mean, for example, if you get you're in your car, you get hit by another driver. If the other driver, hypothetically, doesn't have insurance or you have collision, you're going to go after your own company to get collision. Your own company can sue the other driver. So it's like a subrogation action. So when you're dealing with the Department of Revenue, and I do agree with you, you know, the intent of it is to collect the money that the state of Massachusetts has paid out in welfare. That's the intent. It also goes to the next step, which is if the person is not on welfare, they're going to try to enforce the order because it's expensive going to probate court. You know, I certainly sympathize with this gentleman here because you can feel a sense in the probate court, you know, that you're a persona non grata since you're a male. But I think also the fact is that if, like in your case, if your wife owes you support money, you certainly are entitled to enforce it. You don't need DOR. You can still file your contempt unless the money's coming from welfare. So yes, the executive branch of government, but it's a policing mechanism. It's not the kind of department you really want to deal with because you're dealing with numbers and not an individual. So somebody like this gentleman can fall right into the crack. And it does need improvement, there's no doubt about it. But I think basically it's a good idea because it saves a lot of legal fees.
Well, we did ask the Department of Revenue, and I just want to quickly read out a statement to that they provided to us. We asked the Department of Revenue, why are they representing individual people inside the cases, whether it's a male or a female? And their response was, a DOR staff member will be at the court hearing, but he or she will be there only to provide the court with information we have. For example, financial information about you or the other parent. DOR cannot provide you or the other parent with legal representation. Our attorneys represent DOR. They do not represent neither parent.
Well, I disagree with that, and I don't mind telling you why.
We see this happening every single day in court.
No question. Their role is to get reimbursed, of course. But if you take a situation such as a paternity action, where there's no marriage, okay, and the woman is collecting welfare for the child, they have to first prove that that male is the father of that child. So for any other reason, that's representation. So that statement is not necessarily correct by DOR. Their major function should be get the money. But they're also providing a function saying, you, Mr. X, is the father of Miss Y. Okay? So that's a conflict. Of course it is.
Now, and it's interesting that it is a conflict because we've keep raising that question to them. We see time and time, every Thursday, whether it's in the Lawrence Probate Court, whether it's in front of Judge Mary Manzi, whether it's in front of Judge Mary Ann Shahagan, or whether it's in front of John Cronin, we see the attorneys for the Department of Revenue standing up when a party's case is announced in the courts, and basically they stand up and introduce themselves. By that statement that they provided that says that they're only there to provide the court with financial information, shouldn't they be sitting and waiting for the judge to ask for their for the financial information rather than, hi, I'm such and such representing the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or the department, like they would say?
I'm not sure your question.
Well, should they be standing up before once a particular party? So let's say I'm in the court. The Montalvo matter stands up. Now DOR will stand up and say, before you even get to the table, they already identified themselves on the record.
Well, don't forget that they've had to go to the probation department first. In the probation department, they're going to do a little talking in terms of trying to reach an agreement. If they don't reach an agreement, then they go upstairs to the judge. And at that particular point, they would identify themselves as from the Department of Revenue. Maybe we're having a problem with they're from the department, representing the department on reimbursement as opposed to representing somebody as a client per se. That's a little confusing, I would agree with you.
Okay. And now, The Department of Revenue tells me in a written statement that they don't play a role in incarcerating non-custodial parents for if the court finds them in contempt. We have found that the court needs to prove two things. One, that a party has the ability to pay, and two, that they are refusing to pay an order. Are those the guidelines for contempt?
Yes.
So you can
You got to go to law school. I think you're great.
So basically,
You got it right.
the courts have to find that you have the ability to do that. How do they do that? How can someone prove that you do have the ability to pay?
Well, first of all, they find out where you're working, if you're working, and they also do a very simple thing. It's called like an IRS audit. For example, if you are, I don't know how involved they get, but when I'm doing a divorce case, I'm looking at what's your lifestyle? Do you have a house that's $500,000? Do you have a low mortgage? Do you have a 19 or a 2010 Mercedes? Do you eat out every night? What's your vacation? So you look at the lifestyle, and don't tell me now that you're living in a $500,000 house, you have a brand new Mercedes, and you go out to eat every day, that you're only making $10,000 a year. That's obvious, not so. So you look at what is the spendable income of the person that you're trying to get to pay support. That's what you should be looking at. And what's the capacity to make a living? So can they send you to jail in answer to your question? Sure they can if it's a criminal contempt. And generally you better have broken it a few times before you get hauled into jail.
Now you say it's a criminal contempt. So if it's a criminal contempt, don't a particular party, whether you're a female or a male, have the right to a jury trial?
No, not in probate court.
You don't?
You're not. In probate court, you don't have a right to a jury trial, period, end of story.
Why? Why is that? I mean, don't everybody have the right to face their accuser? Don't anybody have the, and the Constitution says that you have the right to a jury trial if you're accused of owing more than $20.
I think we're mixing apples and oranges here, okay? When you're dealing with the criminal court system, where you've broken the law, there's a crime itself against the general public. When you're dealing with a crime with the general public, yes, you're entitled to a jury trial. No question about it. When you're dealing with a criminal contempt or a civil contempt, you're not really breaking the law to the general public at large. You disobeyed a court order.
So they file it. You really can't, unfortunately, sit and wait for somebody else to do something else. Because what happens is the order can go back as far as the date of service. And that means that once you file the complaint, the court's going to actually mail you a summons, or they might give the summons to the Department of Revenue. And what happens is if the Department of Revenue doesn't serve that summons on time, then all that time you're actually losing. So what I suggest to my clients is if you want to file through the Department of Revenue, it's better to pay the extra $35 or $45, get your own constable, serve the other party with that complaint, because the sooner you serve them, the sooner you can actually change the current order and change the amount of child support that you're actually paying. So especially if a person has lost their job, every week's going to count if they're paying a $300 order, if they're paying a $150 order. The day that it actually gets reduced is very important because you'll be saving money throughout that whole time. And by the time that it comes to the hearing date, which sometimes may take a month, 2 months, 3 months, unfortunately, you have a lot of money that has accrued during that time that you're going to be looked at to pay back. And you might not have that ability because you're not working.
Right, and
don't you also have the ability, once you file your complaint for modification, let's say you file the complaint Monday, you get a date to go back in within 21 days, and within that 21 days you got to make sure the other party was served with 7 days. However, as soon as you file that complaint and give them the notice, you can also ask for a temporary order, which means you can be in court if you use the constable, and I do agree with you, 100%. You'll be in court in 2 weeks. You don't have to wait 21 days.
So it'd be a short order notice that you can put in as far as
it's not a short order. It's a motion on the complaint for modification. Same way if you file a divorce. You file a divorce, you can be in court in a couple of weeks on a temporary order for support, custody, alimony, etc., etc., etc. So you can go quicker. It's better to get a lawyer, all kidding aside.
Now,
That's what he should do, is get a lawyer.
Well,
With 3 jobs, you got to pay $25 a week.
let me ask you, if a person goes in and files for a modification for reduction of their child support, and we want the actual support to go back from the date of actual service, like you mentioned, should they be writing the word non-prong-tongue on it? Are you familiar with that
No,
term?
of course, non-prong-tongue.
Non-prong-tongue, did I say it right?
It's okay. Send you back to Latin school.
Which is it's a definition of going back to the actual date of the actual service.
We're going to try res ipsa loquitur pretty soon.
Res judicata even.
Now,
We're all set.
we hear a lot in the court systems that the Department of Revenue uses dirty tactics. They will use extortion. Some may go out as far as saying that they extorting people in the court system. We've heard some attorneys mention, well, if you don't have $1,000 today, you're going to go to jail. Now, we established that the judges are the ones that sentence individual people to jail, not the actual DOR representatives, okay? And if they're representing the state for the Title D4 funding for the welfare, then they don't have the right to ask for jail time or threaten anybody with jail time, correct? Do they have that right?
No, not at all. And I believe in 2004, when I was working with the Department of Revenue and also Essex County Probate and Family Court, that issue rose, and I believe that they needed to address it, and they weren't allowed to make those type of statements to people, especially you have people that are worried about going to jail, you have people that are worried about trying to find this money in order to pay the other parent, and sometimes they don't have that money. So sometimes when these statements are made, obviously it's inappropriate, like you said, because the judge is the one who makes the ultimate decision.
And it's kind of difficult for someone, a family member, to want to see their child, their son, their daughter go to jail. So what we're finding is that most of these parents are actually coming up with the actual money. So is that a tactic that is working for the Department of Revenue?
It is, in a sense, but I want to, if I can,
yes,
Hector?
please.
You know, your situation troubled me where they took more money out of him on an arrearage. That means he owed, let's say he owed $5,000, you made a deal to pay $50 a week. Mm-hmm. But what happened was they found that you got a check for $1,000, so they grabbed the whole $1,000. That's a very interesting problem, because they're entitled to do that. But if he, in his agreement, okay, that you put down no more than $50 a week, now you might be able to sue the department.
Well, mine was a court order.
I know, but in your court order, there should be a stipulation that says it's $50 a week, no more than $50 a week. Not that they can open the floodgates, which is what they did on him. Let me say that's not unusual, especially income tax checks, because it's money owed, okay? Unless he makes it a court order that says it's money owed, but I don't have to pay you more than $50. Because if he doesn't pay the $50, he can go to jail.
Right.
So I see the difference, but I think you got to change the order that stops them from going in and collecting more than $50 a week, if that's the situation. It just dawned on me when he was going through it. I said, that isn't fair, but it happens every day, and we both see that.
Yeah, and we see it a lot too. And I mean, I just like to state that when a court issues an order, whether you're a male or a female, you do have that right to modify that order. If you disagree with the actual order, you have the right to appeal that order as well. Those are steps that people can take as well if they're dissatisfied with a judgment from the court, forcing you to pay an order that you can't physically do after you stated on the record that you don't have the ability to pay. Can those orders be appealed?
What, you're talking about well, is it the complaint for modification, then you get an order for child support, or are you talking about the contempt?
Well, once the actual order is issued for child support and the person does not agree with the actual order, what steps can they actually take?
Okay. With regards to with a child support order, there's this worksheet that that the court and the statute has incorporated that basically punches out a number. And it's a formula that's calculated. It takes into account the gross income, how much health insurance is actually paid, any dental insurance that's actually paid, daycare expenses that are actually paid, how many children, the income of the other party as well, and then a number kind of just spits out. And with that number, that's the number that they typically use. To appeal it, you could appeal that number. However, the likelihood of it changing is not very likely.
And go
right.
up.
And I don't know an attorney that would actually waste the time to appeal it, knowing that the statute is usually the number that they always give anyway. So.
The only place to go is the appeals court. They won't even hear you
Right.
on that. Let's be for real.
Right.
Correct.
I mean, technically, I do agree with you, Counselor.
But you could.
Practically,
Right.
forget it.
Right.
Ms. Rodriguez, if anyone out there that is facing child support issues or needs some legal expertise, how do they reach you?
My telephone number is 978-683-0508. My law office is actually in Lawrence on 12 Pemberton Way. We're on Essex Street, and there's a Bank of America building. We're actually on the 4th floor of that building. So you could stop by and see me, and obviously I'll help. And my email address is pretty easy to remember. It's Attorney Joanna Rodriguez, it's kind of long, @gmail.com.
Great, and we've watched you a couple of times in the court, and you're a real sharp attorney. So anyone out there that's looking for a sharp attorney, there she is right there. And if you're looking for another attorney, sharp attorney, Mr. Diffusio, how do people get a hold of you if they needed to reach?
Well, I'm
your
not as
assistance?
sharp as my colleague next to me, but I will admit that it's 978-687-1777, just like the Revolution, 1777, okay? And we've been around for 45 years almost, 43. So we're there.
And we're going to continue to work with you, Mr. Babb, on trying to follow your case and report back to the viewers and let them decide. I want to thank the viewers for watching. I want to thank my guests, Attorney Rodriguez, Attorney Diffusio, and Mr. David Babb. You've been watching Behind the Scenes. Join us next time when we go behind the scenes to ask the tough questions, bring you their responses,